Most people think the masked guards in Squid Game are just faceless enforcers, following orders with no real power. But what if I told you they might actually be in more trouble than the frontman himself? Look closely, and you'll realize the guards aren't just carrying out executions. They are actively participating in kidnapping, mass murder, and human trafficking. In the real world, just following orders isn't a valid legal defense for crimes of this scale. So, if Squid Game was exposed and law enforcement caught the guards, how long would they actually spend in prison? Would they be treated like brainwashed foot soldiers? Or would the courts punish them just as severely as the masterminds behind the game? The answer might surprise you because legally speaking, these guards could be facing life in prison, or worse. Let's break it down. At first glance, the guards in Squid Game seem like mindless enforcers, just following orders. But if you think about it, they are actually directly responsible for some of the game's worst crimes. They execute players, transport kidnapped contestants, and enforce the brutal system that keeps the game running. So, here's the big question. Would they actually be prosecuted if the game was exposed? Some people might argue that they were just following orders, but in reality, that excuse doesn't hold up in court, especially when it comes to mass murder and human trafficking. South Korea has strict laws against these crimes, and history shows that even low-level enforcers can receive severe punishments. The courts wouldn't just go after the frontman or the VIPs, they would also hunt down the guards who carried out the killings. But how severe would their punishment be? Could they face decades in prison, life sentences, or even execution? To find out, let's take a closer look at the specific crimes the guards committed and how much time they would serve for each one. Most people focus on the frontman or the VIPs as the biggest villains in Squid Game, but the guards are just as guilty, if not more. They don't just enforce the rules, they actively participate in murder, kidnapping, and human trafficking. The most obvious crime the guards commit is murder. Whenever a contestant is eliminated, it's the guards who pull the trigger or dispose of the bodies. Some might argue that they're just following orders, but under South Korean law, that doesn't excuse them from responsibility. According to Article 250 of the Criminal Act, murder carries a minimum sentence of 10 years, with the possibility of life imprisonment or even the death penalty. But here's the key detail. Each execution is a separate murder charge. Since the guards collectively kill hundreds of players, they could be facing hundreds of murder charges, making life imprisonment the most likely outcome. Additionally, Article 32 states that anyone who assists in murder is just as guilty as the killer. So even the guards who didn't pull the trigger but helped transport bodies or enforce the system would still be held legally accountable. Did you notice that contestants never actually sign a legal contract before they enter Squid Game? Sure, they are invited to play, but once they arrive, they are drugged, transported against their will, and held hostage, which legally qualifies as kidnapping. According to Article 288 of the Criminal Act, kidnapping for criminal intent is punishable by at least 5 years in prison. But here's the kicker. If the kidnapped victims are harmed or killed, the sentence increases to life imprisonment. Since every contestant was kidnapped and forced into a life or death situation, the guards would face hundreds of counts of kidnapping, stacking up their sentences well beyond a lifetime in prison. Even the guards who only escorted players from their dorms to the game arenas would still be complicit in unlawful detention, adding more years to their punishment. The guards aren't just random workers, they are part of a massive underground criminal operation, which means they could also be charged under organized crime and conspiracy laws. South Korea's Article 114 of the Criminal Act states that anyone who joins an organized criminal group and knowingly participates in its illegal activities can face an additional 10+ years in prison. Since the guards aren't just following orders but actively keeping the game running, they would be charged as criminal conspirators. And here's the most shocking part. Because Squid Game is a global human trafficking operation, the guards could also be prosecuted in international courts. That means they wouldn't just be facing South Korean law, but human rights violations on a global scale. At this point, one thing is clear. If the game was ever exposed, the guards would be arrested immediately. But how much time would they actually serve? Let's break it all down. Now that we've broken down the guards' crimes, the big question remains. How long would they actually serve in prison? Let's analyze their sentencing based on aggravating and mitigating factors, because while their crimes are extreme, there are always legal arguments that could slightly impact their final punishment. Several factors would increase the guards' prison sentences to the maximum possible punishment. Multiple murders. Courts always give harsher sentences for serial killings or mass executions. Since the guards personally executed contestants, they could face multiple life sentences or even the death penalty. Kidnapping and unlawful detention. Every contestant was kidnapped and forced into the games, meaning the guards would receive hundreds of kidnapping charges, each adding years to their sentence. Conspiracy and organized crime. Courts increase sentences when criminals operate as part of a large, structured criminal enterprise. The guards were part of an international human trafficking operation, making their case even worse. Lack of remorse. Did you notice how the guards show no emotion when killing contestants? In real-life court cases, criminals who show zero remorse typically receive the harshest possible punishment. With these aggravating factors, it's highly likely that most guards would receive life imprisonment, and execution would be possible for those directly involved in mass killings. Could anything reduce the guards' sentences? Here are a few legal loopholes they might try to use. Following orders and coercion. Some guards might argue that they were forced into their roles and would have been killed if they refused. Courts might reduce their sentences if they can prove this, but it wouldn't erase their guilt entirely. Lower level involvement. Some guards only transport bodies or monitor cameras rather than executing contestants. They could receive shorter sentences than those who directly pulled the trigger. Cooperation with authorities. If a guard turned against the organization and provided key evidence to law enforcement, they might get a plea deal. But even then, they would still spend decades in prison. Even in the best case scenario, the guards would still face 20+ years in prison, while those involved in murders or kidnappings would receive life sentences or execution. After breaking down the guards' crimes, it's clear. They wouldn't just walk away as innocent foot soldiers. They would be among the most heavily sentenced criminals in the Squid Game operation. With hundreds of murder charges, mass kidnappings, and conspiracy to commit organized crime, South Korean courts wouldn't be lenient. Given the aggravating factors, their direct involvement in executions, their role in a large criminal organization, and their lack of remorse, they would likely receive multiple life sentences or even the death penalty. Even if they argued they were just following orders, South Korean law holds individuals responsible for their actions. Some guards might be able to reduce their sentences by cooperating with authorities, but even in the best case scenario, they would still spend decades in prison, if not life behind bars. This raises a question for Squid Game fans. Do you think the guards deserve the same punishment as the frontman, or should they be treated differently? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this breakdown interesting, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden details of Squid Game. Thanks for watching. Until next time.